All right. Well, welcome. I am here with Katrina. Katrina, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Katrina. I am currently a physical therapist. I just recently graduated. I'm going to be doing a residency with Kaiser starting very soon, actually. But today we're going to be talking about phases of our menstrual cycle and how that can kind of affect our training and our climbing. And I got kind of interested in this because I listened to a podcast, actually, which is very fitting. Um, it was the Training Beta podcast, and they went really in depth about it. And I just started to do my own research, and so came this article.
Yeah, and the article's great because one thing, it's this is not on my radar. I'm a male, right? And it's not something that's like top of mind for me. And so when you submitted this article, I was like, I read through it and it's research cited and there's all this information. And there's not that much in climbing that is new to me, but this was completely new and I was excited. And so I'm going to be a little bit of a novice on this topic. And so if some of my questions seem kind of silly, it's because I really don't know that much about the menstrual cycle and how you should train with it. And I think this will be an interesting podcast, one for female climbers, but also for male climbers, just to understand this entire process. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of dive into it. So I know that you have the article that you wrote, and you're going to be showing it on the screen for people who are watching the video, and then obviously people listening to the podcast will hear the verbal components. But I'm going to just start with like a very basic question, I feel kind of silly asking it, but it kind of just need to know like what is the menstrual cycle and what are the phases? Just like break that down. Imagine that like we're just starting from square one and we're in sex ed and we're learning like what goes on, in the female body.
Sorry, I think it froze a little bit.
Oh, I can always cut that. Can you hear now?
Okay, I can.
Okay.
So kind
So
of
we'll hold
describing
on.
the
Let me
menstrual
just
cycle.
time code that so we can 228. Give me one sec. 228 can cut. Okay. Did you hear when I said what goes on in the female body?
No, I did not. I think
Okay.
that's when I cut off.
All right. So that'll be the thing I'll end with is just basically say, what goes on in the female body. I'm asking you to describe the menstrual cycle.
Okay. Yeah, that's not a silly question at all. I think only about half the population has been through this, and so the other half has not. Um, so the menstrual cycle is just basically, on average, a 28-day cycle. There are different phases, which I'll get into, and it's all surrounded around, I mean, at least for us, the time that we bleed. And so typically that time is between 5 and 7 days. There's a lot of symptoms that go on. Everyone is a little bit different in what they experience and how severely they experience it. And then I'm actually going to share my screen for this. There are
Mm-hmm.
different phases, like I had mentioned. Um, so if you look at this chart right over here, I kind of have it outlined. In order to track your cycle, what they do is they kind of start tracking the day you start bleeding. And so that would be day one of your cycle. So week one is typically your period week. And then week one and week two combined, that would be your follicular phase. After your follicular phase, we have ovulation, which is when your egg drops. Um, Sorry, actually, not sure how accurate that is, but we can move on from that. Week 3 and 4 is your luteal phase. And so when we talk about training, we want to be more in like the training heavy phases during your follicular phase, which I'll kind of get into as to why.
And is this something where like most females are aware of their like each of these phases? Like if you ask, poll 10 females, they're like, I know when my follicular phase is and I know where when my luteal phase is, or is this something that's more not that many people know?
I think it's getting a little bit more popular. If anything, I feel like most people with periods, they know intuitively more than they know consciously.
Mm,
A lot of us are like, oh, it's like the week before my period. I'm like, getting like really warm or like I'm really tired this week, like I feel like we're able to recognize these symptoms, but it's all in retrospect. Like we never predict it. We never are like, oh, I know for sure this is how I'm going to feel and that I'm in my luteal phase. Which is why I think it's so interesting that it's getting more popular because there's more and more research being done on it. And then the more that people are aware of it, the more they can actually tailor their training programs to it.
And I have to imagine, I mean, since this is a cycle, that each phase there's like different hormones that are released. I have to imagine that. Is each phase associated with different mixtures of hormones?
Yeah, there are. So the three, I guess, like biggest hormones that we focus on are progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. So most people already kind of know a little bit about estrogen or testosterone or have at least heard of it. But there's also progesterone. So each of these hormones, they play a different role in our body and they kind of fluctuate throughout our cycle, right? So progesterone, for example, is responsible for increasing the breakdown of protein, which we all know muscle is made of protein, which will come into play, right?
Oh,
Estrogen,
interesting.
it's estrogen responsible for reducing the breakdown of protein, and so it's more of like a protective hormone. And then testosterone, responsible for growth, maintenance, and repair of muscle. And so I'm actually going to share my screen one more time for those of us who are watching,
Hmm.
so we can have a little like chart to follow.
And
So
yeah, kind
this
of just
little chart,
describe the chart too for people who are just listening.
yeah. So this chart over here, it kind of charts out the levels of hormones throughout your phase. And so, for example, at the very beginning of the chart, we have our period week, right? This is our considered kind of like our quote unquote low hormone phase. So typically your estrogen and your progesterone, it's a little bit lower. And then as you go on to ovulation, your estrogen spikes. And so you can see here that this estrogen line, it goes way up. Once you ovulate, you go into this kind of crazy looking like hormone spike. And so what happens here, there's a little cross. Your progesterone actually increases, and then your estrogen also increases, but not as much as the progesterone, which is important because it's not about the levels of estrogen and progesterone independently. It's more about how they interact with each other and the ratio between them. So, for example,
Well,
over
they're
here
almost like
in the
inverted,
follicular,
it looks like follicular
they
phase, it
are.
looks like you have, high estrogen, high estradiol, low progesterone, and then luteal it flips, right?
Exactly. So that's that kind of ratio that I was kind of getting at. So in your follicular phase, you have like a higher estrogen ratio. And if you remember, estrogen is responsible for reducing the breakdown of protein, whereas progesterone is responsible for increasing the breakdown. So when you have a higher estrogen ratio, you actually have, I guess, like what I think Alex Steiger said was you're more like a man. Like you have the ability to protect that breakdown of protein and you're able to have a more effective training session. Versus in the luteal phase, when you have lower estrogen, you don't have as much of that protective mechanism for you in order to kind of train harder and like feel better, if that makes sense.
So what you're saying is basically the follicular phase is like the phase where you want to go at it. Like you want to make sure that you have long sessions, intense strength, difficult like all those different components related to just challenging yourself. That's in this follicular phase because of that estrogen, estradiol slash progesterone like ratio. Is that the main?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I get that. That makes sense. Here's my question. And again, I'm completely I don't know much about this topic. Is this true? Like that's like is this like is there cuz I see this I'm like okay, that does make sense. I'm sure that you can measure like scientifically you can measure all these, different hormones. But is training in this follicular phase and having that enhance your ability, are there actually studies that support this, or is it right now just theoretical?
So I haven't found studies about like training in the follicular phase. We've done, I guess, like more studies on like very specific things. So for example, like how strong is your quad during your follicular phase versus your luteal phase, and they have found differences. They have
Hmm.
found that your
It's like
quad
a
does
like a
produce.
one joint muscle. You're pressing in. You're saying, okay, I'm
Exactly.
this strong in this phase, this strong in this phase. Okay.
Exactly. But I can tell you from like personal experience, I've had a lot of free time recently, and so I've been doing a lot of climbing and working out, and I haven't necessarily been pushing myself to train more during the follicular phase. However, I do feel that kind of like fatigue and that mental block during my luteal phase, which I
Hmm.
have learned to like play to my advantage. So
Meaning like you dial it down a little bit more during luteal phase.
exactly. I use that time to kind of do a little bit more mobility. I use that time to work on my technique. And then on top of that, I'm just like a little bit easier on myself because I know that my body is just feeling a lot heavier and a lot more kind of like, I guess, for lack of a better word, icky.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so even if studies don't show it, I think you can kind of just watch your own cycle and track your own cycle and just see how you're feeling because everyone has such different symptoms.
Yeah, I have to assume like some again, like I feel like such an idiot during this podcast because I don't experience these things and I don't ask. Like most of my partners, I think, yeah, majority of my partners are female that I climb with, and I don't ask them. I'm not like, hey, what phase of your cycle are in, or how are you feeling? But I have to assume that individually each person like responds to this differently. I have to assume there's individual variability, and especially like on maybe how you feel during each stage, but also maybe even also the symptoms per se, or like how each woman or female responds to their cycle.
Yeah, I mean, it's not silly at all. Like, I feel like even sometimes we don't know how we're feeling. And so
Mm-hmm.
for you to have to, like, from an outside perspective, understand that, I think I like that everyone's trying to learn a little bit more here. So,
So what are the effects? Like basically, we have these two different like phases of the cycle, the follicular, the luteal. Um, what are I guess the word isn't symptoms. That would be a bad word to say. I think the word would be effects, right? Is that
yeah,
the
there we go.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
in the
good.
medical mind. I'm like, no, symptoms probably shouldn't
No,
shouldn't be
I
there. So
use that
yeah.
word too.
So what are the effects of a menstrual cycle on a climber?
So I'm going to focus a little more on the luteal phase where our progesterone is higher than our estrogen. So the things that we might experience are like a higher core temperature. So a lot of these studies, in order to track the cycle, they use like a basal thermometer because they know that your body will respond this way. And so during your luteal phase, there's research cites different, I guess, ranges, but your temperature will be increased. It'll be just a little bit, but it'll be enough for you to kind of feel hot. And so
And is this like if you take a thermometer, put it under your mouth, or is this literally like your core temperature, like your?
I believe it's like a thermometer that you use like under the tongue, but it's just
Mhm.
slightly more accurate. It has one more decimal point at the end
Got it.
because your temperature only increases like zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.8 maybe.
Okay. So it's basically if
So
you take a highly sensitive thermometer, sublingual, and there is there's this increase in temperature.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Um, and then on top of that, kind of like a scale that we use to rate our exertion, I guess you should say, is the RPE, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. So the
Hmm.
RPE is kind of like a chart. And for those of you who are watching, I'll pull that up so you can see it. And during research and during like physical therapy, even, you might see this. This is a chart that we use to kind of track how hard someone is working during an exercise. So there's two different scales. They're pretty similar. So on the left side over here, we have the 1 through 10. 1 being it's very light, right? And then 10 being it's like a complete max effort. And
So this
then we
would
have,
basically be someone scaling themselves. You know, exerting would be like a climbing session. Like, okay, this climbing session, I'm on a bunch of warm ups. This feels like a 1. This is very light. Or I'm like limit bouldering. This is a 10. This is max effort. Would that be how
exactly.
a good way to apply?
Yeah, exactly. Um, and so I'm just going to use the 1 through 10 because I think it's a little simpler.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to stop sharing real quick. So basically, they've done a lot of research where they ask people who have periods, like, how do you feel during this stage? And they'll ask them like constantly throughout their cycle. And they notice that in the luteal phase, people are rating themselves higher on the exertion scale when they're doing the same exercises. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
even if nothing has changed in their load or like their intensity, anything like that, they still rate it higher. It feels harder. Um, so during your luteal phase, you'll feel things are just more tiring. You'll feel that fatigue in your body, even though, like, for example, like you're climbing something that you warmed up on the other week, but then this week you're falling off of it mid climb, right? And so there's like a certain level of like fatigue that you feel during your luteal phase that you might not feel in any other phase.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Um, and then on top of that, I actually found a few more, which are pretty interesting. So
A
you
few more
also have
studies,
kind of
or?
like a few more studies. I did some preparations for this podcast and I
Oh,
found
awesome. All
even
right. These are
more than I
bonus
did.
bonus studies. I love
These
it.
are
Yeah, let's
bonus
hear.
nuggets. Yeah.
Uh,
So one of them was that you actually have increased sleep disturbances during your luteal phase, so you don't sleep as well. Um, and so I think that can also play into the whole fatigue thing. But they suggested you can try like more natural, I guess, ways to help you sleep, like cutting off your phone time an hour or two before bedtime, right? You
Wait,
can
say
try
that one
like
more
tart
time,
cherry
just so I
juice.
can
I found
catch
it.
that. So, what did the study show?
It showed that you have increased sleep disturbances during your luteal phase. So you just don't sleep as well those 2 weeks before your period, which can
Hold
also
on. Hey,
play into
Katrina,
that
hold
whole
on one
fatigue
second. I think
aspect
it.
of your
Oh,
climbing.
can you hear me, Katrina? Hold on one
I
second.
can
I
hear
think
you.
it. Yeah, it cut out for a second. So I'm gonna ask you that one more time and then stitch it in.
Okay.
I think it was like a
Okay.
not sure on the signal, but I'll have you describe the study one more time because it cut when you were saying it the first
Okay.
time.
No worries.
I'll just ask you one more
Oh,
time.
okay. Okay.
So yeah, so describe the study. All right, go
Sorry, I
ahead.
think you cut out this time.
Yeah, huh? I wonder why. Let me just see. Well, we'll give it a go. But yeah, describe the study one more time.
Yeah, so in this study, they found that you have like increased sleep disturbances in your luteal phase. So you just don't sleep as well those 2 weeks before
Which
your period.
you need to recover, right? Sleep is recovery.
Yes, exactly. Sleep is recovery. Um, so they kind of suggest using like focusing a little bit more on your sleep time efforts. So things like cutting off your phone time, like 1 or 2 hours before bed, or trying things like tart cherry juice. Tart cherry juice has melatonin and it has like I forget what it's called, but it has something that helps your body actually produce the melatonin, and so you can focus your efforts on trying to have like a better quality sleep. Another interesting thing I found was that you have increased pain sensitivity during your luteal phase. And so I believe Alex Steiger actually like touched on this, but I forgot about it when she was talking about it. But like for example, when you're climbing, right? And skin is such a big factor in climbing, right? But when you're climbing and then you're like one of your factors is your skin stopping you, I feel like that's so frustrating, right? It's like I know I can climb more, but my skin hurts and I can't do it anymore. So that's something that can play in during your luteal phase, and that's something to take into account. So maybe you're not trying to do like a bulk, like endurance workout. You're trying to do more maybe power or technique during that week, right? And then finally, my last one, you actually burn more calories during your luteal phase. It's like minimal. I don't think it's significant enough where you should be like completely changing your diet. But I think that's why we kind of feel those cravings or we feel like we need to eat a little more during that
Oh,
time. It's
interesting.
because we're burning slightly more calories during that time too.
So
And
making sure to
so,
stay fueled.
exactly, making sure that you're on top of your nutrition and that you're like giving yourself all those macros that you need in order to perform well.
Yeah. To be honest, the luteal phase sounds like it kind of sucks. Like it does. Are there any like pause? Like I mean, all this research is coming out the luteal. I feel bad for the luteal phase. Are there any positives like about the luteal phase, or if someone's in that phase, um, like like what should they focus on? Like what is important?
So what I found is that during the luteal phase, if I focus on mobility, I did
Okay.
yoga for a little bit and it really helped me a lot. And so I kind of stopped, but I've noticed that if I do yoga during the luteal phase, it makes me feel a lot better. Like even though I'm not like climbing as hard as I would want to or I would like to, at least I'm getting in like kind of like a mobility and it's still strengthening and it's also just relaxing all at the same time. Um, and so focusing on things like mobility, your technique, you can even like sometimes I'll just climb completely out of my grade range because I have no expectations on myself during the luteal phase, and I find that I can do some stuff.
So you
And
just kind of
so
mix it up a little bit. Try things you
I
normally
do.
wouldn't try.
Exactly.
That's
And
interesting.
it's yeah, so I kind of like I have less pressure on myself during those 2 weeks, which I guess is kind of nice. Um, and
So
that allows me
there
to
are
kind of
some benefits to the luteal phase.
there are,
Um,
sadly, there it's like a lower expectation for myself, but it actually works out pretty well.
so new beta, like keep moving. Yeah, I like what you mentioned, like technique training. Obviously, time to like focus on drills, learn new exercises, knowledge acquisition. Yeah, that all sounds good. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's in your article. You talk about the amygdala as well. Was that
That's
more?
right.
Is that in the follicular phase that you have like this heightened amygdala activity?
No, that's actually also during the luteal phase.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, luteal phase is just
So
taking
luteal
all the
phase,
hits
it's
here.
not getting a good, it's not getting a good rap. So you just get. I'm assuming that just makes you more scared, right? Don't do run out slab
It does.
during the luteal phase.
Exactly. So you definitely have increased fear during your luteal phase too. And so I think if you wanted to do run out slab or something like that, you could if you would really like to. And I know there's a lot of people who are really
Love
good
run
at that
out
type of
slab?
stuff and they'll just
No,
do it all the
nobody
time.
loves.
Exactly.
Nobody loves run out slab.
Nobody loves it, but they can be good at it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, I think when you're fearful, we make more mistakes. And so that kind of stuff, I'm a very fearful climber. Like I'm scared all the time. And so when I'm even more scared on top of that, I realize that I like get injured a little bit more than I usually do. And
Yeah.
so during that phase, I'll just kind of like ease back a little bit, step back, just try things that I'm a little more comfortable with.
And then follicular phase, like what's the emphasis there? I mean, I can see where we're leading to. Like that's where I'm assuming that's where you just, theoretically, based on some of this research, yeah, what do you do in the follicular phase? Like if technique, mobility, beta, and climb stuff that's not as scary is your luteal phase. What's follicular phase look like?
So follicular phase is basically the opposite, right? You want to do your high intensity strength training. You're going to do more of those like difficult climbs or your projects that you've really been working at. And you might want to have longer sessions, like your body might actually be able to handle those longer sessions. And just overall, like just focusing on just strength and power training, I think is the follicular phase is a nice time to do that. So I know that this is getting like a little more popular than it was before, so they call it follicular based training. So follicular based training is basically when you focus all of your very intense efforts in the follicular phase, and then during your luteal phase, you'll focus on maybe learning a new movement or learning a new exercise or something like that so that you can start training it during your follicular phase.
This would be a fascinating research study to just apply to climbing. Like I'm starting to like think a little bit of how you could start applying that. But yeah, it's interesting how they've now tagged it. Like there's a type of training based on the cycle, and it's getting more and more popular. And it's kind of cool that research is starting to support it. Um, I have a question. Is this something that, as like a male climber, that I just like ignore and just let it be? Or is it something that like I have a discussion with my partner about, hey, looks, I don't know. Is it something like, because I train with the partners that I climb
I
with,
think
and is
it's
it
just
something
something
I
to
bring
like
up?
understand. Like
Yeah, say like, hey,
you don't have to be like, oh, like what phase are you in? Or like,
that's up to
I
them.
think
That's up to the
like
female. Yeah.
for coaches it might apply.
Yeah.
That is, but I think for coaches, like if you are a coach, this might actually be some helpful research for you. And if your client is comfortable with sharing this kind of stuff with you, they can start tracking their cycles and letting you know like what phase they're in so that you can curate a program for them that will better match what they're feeling that week. Um, but like if your partner is like a female climber or someone who experiences periods, you don't necessarily have to ask them outright like, hey, what phase are you in, right? I just
Yeah.
think
That's a faux
like
pas,
maybe
I believe.
understanding, yeah, like maybe understanding like why they might be struggling on something or why they might be more tired. Like I think you at least have the knowledge to do that. Um,
And I love
yeah.
what you brought up with coaches, though, especially even male coaches, is yeah, I mean that's something to open up the conversation, and then the hope, like more and more female coaches, right, that are coaching climbers, like this seems like a really good kind of like discussion, with two people that are really kind of in the same boat as well. Um, have you noticed any differences? Like I know you mentioned like yourself when you're doing in your luteal phase, you'll do more yoga. Like follicular phase, do you notice more differences yourself as like you feel like, going a little bit harder or lifting more weights? And does it depend on what, does it consistent all the time? Is like how much variability is there?
Sorry, I think you're cutting out again.
Oh, it cut out again.
Yeah.
Okay. How much variability is there? Like within yourself? Like, is
Um,
this something that from month to month it's rather consistent, or is it something that may have differences?
Um, I mean, every time, ever since I wrote this article, I've been focusing a little bit more on it, and so every time I have a period, I learn something new. But what I've learned about myself is that like I will not feel that good until like halfway through like the week that I'm actually having my period. Because the first few days I'm like cramping, I'm not feeling great, I'm tired, my back hurts, right? But then, like halfway into my period, I start to feel really good, and then I start climbing like all my projects. Like I start sending everything, and I'm like, this is amazing, all right? And then I hit that 2 week mark, and I can really feel the decline from there. Like I'm like falling off of stuff that I flashed like the week before,
Oh
and
wow.
so I think for me, I don't know if if I'm like making this stuff up or if I'm really seeing it in myself. But for me, I just get really, really tired during the luteal phase, and then I feel really strong during follicular phase. And so, like for example, I went out climbing the other week. We went to Red Rocks, but I was so happy because that climbing trip landed in my follicular phase, and I was like, "This is perfect.
It
Like,
just
I'm
timed
gonna
it just
send
like exactly.
exactly." And so I noticed that like I just have the energy to do a lot more with my body and with myself during the follicular phase than I do during my luteal phase.
Are there any kind of last thoughts or last comments you have of people who are listening to this, viewing it, or reading the article?
Um, I think for those of you who do not have periods, I appreciate you listening to this if you made it all the way through.
I feel honestly, this is probably like the most like I just feel like first of all, I'm learning a ton, and then yeah, I just feel like I don't know, I didn't know about any of this until I read this article, and I think it's just really helpful that you shared it. But sorry, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. And then for those of us who do experience periods or do have them, I hope that this helps you. Like, even if you don't structure your training program around it, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get stronger. Either way, you will get stronger, but I hope that you could be a little bit more forgiving or you can kind of like give yourself a little bit of a break because you know what's happening with your body. Um, but also, I hope you're able to incorporate it into your training program.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for writing the article and sharing this information. I think it's very valuable to climbers.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. This was actually really fun to talk about, so I'm glad I could share it.
Cool. Well, good luck with everything in the residency, and yeah, I'll see you soon.
Bye.